In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to use the foliage mode in order to place static meshes into your environment very quickly, naturally, and randomly. This way you can populate your environments very quickly instead of having to insert each individual static mesh one by one or duplicating them. Now, the foliage mode is primarily used for placing actual foliage, grass, bushes, trees, and so on. But in this tutorial, we're going to primarily focus on props. So let's begin. So here I have a scene open, a small environment, and this is where I'm going to place the props using the foliage mode. To get to the foliage mode, use this drop-down menu and choose foliage. Shortcut key is Shift 3. Then all you need to do is find a static mesh that you want to use. So I'm going to go into the static meshes folder, and I have props folder, and all the static meshes I created and released with UE5 Retro Office Project tutorial course. So if you want to get these static meshes and use them to create environments, take a look at the course. So find the static mesh you want to use, and in my case, I'm just going to place this chair. I'm going to populate this environment, this floor with chairs. Now I don't want to have to drag these into their level one by one, having to duplicate and position them, and it would just be long and tedious to do that. So instead of doing that, this is why we're using the foliage mode. So find a prop, a static mesh, and just simply left click, hold and drag, and drop it right into this area as the foliage type. And as soon as you do, you'll have this thumbnail pop up that you've added that static mesh to be painted using the foliage mode. You can add more than one, but let's just focus on one first and then we'll add another one. But essentially you can have as many different static meshes here that you'll paint into your world. So once you've added a prop, a static mesh in here, right above on filters, you get to choose what do you want to paint this static mesh on. You can do this on landscapes, on static meshes, or BSP brushes, as well as other foliage that you placed, and on translucent surfaces, or translucent geometry. So for us, we're going to be painting on static meshes. One thing you want to make sure is that your static meshes that you're painting on, such as this floor, is all set to static. If you have mobility set to movable, you're not going to be able to paint on top of these meshes. So for example, this floor right now, I switched over to movable. If you go back to foliage mode, you can see if we want to hover over this piece of floor, I'm not going to be able to paint on it. So make sure that your geometry is set to static. So let's go back to the foliage mode, Shift 3. And once you've added a static mesh, go ahead and choose to paint. This is the first one we're going to cover on how to actually paint that static mesh that you added. So switch over to paint tool or the paint brush in order to paint the selected foliage. Then you want to make sure that this static mesh that you added has a check mark enabled. This means that you're going to be painting this specific static mesh onto the surfaces, onto the static meshes. If you have it disabled, you're not going to be able to paint it. So let's go ahead and enable it. So this way, if you have more, you're able to enable and disable which one you want to paint at any given time. So with it enabled, then you get to come up here in the brush option settings and choose your brush size. How big do you want the brush to be in order for you to paint that static mesh? The density of the foliage to paint. Higher will result in more instances being placed, and lower, it's not going to be as dense. So let's set it to 0.3 right now. And then left click, hold and drag in order to start painting the static mesh with the default properties for the tool, for the paintbrush. And you can see when you left click, hold and drag, you begin to paint that static mesh and place it into your environment. And right here on the bottom, it will say how many instances that you placed inside the level. And right now we have 66. Now the beauty of this method of this foliage mode is all of these are going to be batched and rendered together. So UE5 will see all of these static meshes as one object and not as multiple static meshes of these chairs, thus improving performance. Now let's go back to foliage mode. And if you want to remove anything that you painted, you can use the erase tool and erase the foliage. So I'm going to select the erase tool and left click, hold and drag to paint that out and remove them. And one more. Now let's go ahead and paint a few more so we can kind of go through some of the options. Again, you can define the brush size here, making that smaller or larger depending on the environment, on the size of your brush, or you can use the bracket keys. Left bracket key will decrease the brush size and the right bracket key will increase the brush size. And let's go ahead and paint and place a few more chairs back. Now, once you've painted a set of static meshes into your level, you can click on all and this will select everything. And then you can remove it instead of having to erase it. So you can remove everything selected. Let me undo after you've painted, you can see some of these chairs are kind of overlapping. So you can actually reposition each individual static mesh that you placed by going over to select. And this will allow you to select each individual instance and move it, maybe rotate it, even scale it. So if you want to reposition something that you've placed, you can use this option and have a little bit more precision in the placement of each static mesh. Now the lasso tool will allow you to paint a selection. So this way you don't have to select individual chairs or individual static meshes. You can just paint a selection using the lasso option. So left click, hold, and drag. This will paint. If you want to unpaint or kind of remove from a selection, using the lasso tool, hold shift, and this will unpaint your selection. And if you go back to paint tool, you can use shift to erase. So left click to place, shift left click to erase. And you can see when you press the shift key, it switches over to the erase tool. Now let me go ahead and paint a few more back in. Now we can also go ahead and use the fill tool. This will fill the static mesh with a set of static meshes. So for example, let's come over here and I'm going to use the fill command, and this will allow you to left click. So we still have the chair selected. So this is important, like it's still enabled for us to paint. And with the fill tool, when you left click, this will just place a set amount of static meshes into your environment and just fill that static mesh. Now these static meshes that we're painting on, they're small, 300 by 300 units in width and length. But if we had a larger static mesh, for example, let me go ahead and just drag this out. And let me select the floor, and I'm going to make this larger. So let's say I'm going to scale it 10 by 10. And let me go back to the foliage mode, shift 3. I'm going to select everything and I'm going to delete them, remove. And then let me go back to fill. And then when you left click, you can see that it just places on that individual static mesh and just fills the entire static mesh with the selected prop, with the selected static mesh. It's a very quick way to populate by using the fill tool. Now let me go ahead and select all and remove it. Now, as you saw, whenever you paint, you're going to have at the very top, you have your brush size, your paint density, and erase density. So whenever you begin to paint, you can see that some chairs are overlapping. There's a set number of static meshes that you paint, and at the moment you only have paint density to control. So if you want less, you can go ahead and maybe 0.1 for the density, so you're not going to have as many chairs being painted at the same time. But there also you get a random rotation, and some chairs are overlapping, so you do have actually more controls to paint with for each individual static mesh that you added. So let me put this back at 0.3. And by selecting this chair, left click on it, this will open up a new set of menu options for you to choose and tweak for this added foliage type for this chair. You can also click on this icon right here to hide and unhide the menu details. Here you get to choose. You can kind of swap the static mesh for something else. So if you painted something and you decided, you know what, I don't want this static mesh and I don't want to have to repaint, I just want to kind of swap them back out, you can just redrag and replace all the static meshes for something else. Then you have some other painting options such as density. So you can lower this density to, let's say, 10. So you're not going to be painting as many. And you can see that you are painting a new selection. And you can see that once you've reset your options, if you go over an existing set of static meshes, they don't get repainted. So if you kind of have to tweak these settings first and kind of try things out, and then you can paint. So you're not going to be able to kind of reapply and repaint any given selection. You kind of have to tweak the settings first, paint, see if you like it, and then just continue painting. Or if not, just undo and then tweak the settings further. So let me go ahead and select everything and remove it so we can start with a new set of options. So let's say density. This is pretty good density. It's not auto-populating it very much, so I know we kind of get a little bit more kind of space between the chairs being placed. Then you can also set the radius. This will give each individual chair a little bit more space between each other. So let's say let's set it to 50. And let me actually undo. Let's set this to 50 for radius. And we still have a little bit overlapping of the chairs right here. So actually let me go ahead and undo, and let's increase it to 100. And this should give us enough space so no chairs are going to overlap over each other. And this, of course, this radius will depend on the size of the prop. But this is pretty good amount, pretty good size for radius. And I'm not seeing any chairs that are now overlapping over itself. Now you also have ability to change scale. So as you paint, certain static meshes will be larger or smaller. So in our case, for this chair, I wouldn't want to have these chairs change in size. This is good for natural elements like grass and trees and bushes. But for example, if I wanted to set a minimum to 0.5 and this is 3. So once you start painting, some static meshes will be larger and others will be smaller, and they'll just kind of oscillate between these two values and randomly place and change the scale as you paint. Now, I don't want to do this for the static meshes, for the props, so I'm just going to reset it to default. Offset will allow you to, every static mesh you place gets placed onto that static mesh and other static meshes on this floor at its pivot point. So the pivot point for this chair is right here on the bottom. However, if you need to have an offset, let me undo. So for example, if you wanted to have some props kind of go into the floor, I can set this minimum, let's say -10, and then maximum it'll be raised above the floor, let's say 10 units. So once you paint, some static meshes will be placed into the floor, -10 units, and some will be raised higher off the floor, 10 units, or somewhere in between. So it's kind of random. So you can see this one was a little bit higher. So again, this is probably not good for static mesh prop, but it could work for actual foliage. So let me go ahead and undo and reset this to default. Next, you have align to normal. And usually you do want to have this checked. So for example, if I'm going to paint on top of this surface right here, I'm not going to be able to paint on top because let's cover actually this one and then we'll come back to align to normal. So right now I'm not going to be able to paint above a certain angle, and it's controlled by right here, ground slope angle. So anything above 45 degrees I won't be able to paint. So on these walls I won't be able to paint, or on the ceiling. But if I want to paint on the walls or on the ceiling, I just need to increase my maximum ground slope angle. So if I set this to 90, anything at 90 degrees I'll be able to paint in place. Actually, let me go ahead and increase the density so we can paint a little bit more. So now we can paint at 90 degrees, but not anything higher. So if I need to, I can increase this to 180 and I'll be able to paint on the ceiling. And you can see that everything is aligning to the normal of the surface, of the walls, of the floor, of the ceiling. And this is controlled by align to normal. You usually want to have this on, but if I disable this and I paint, you can see that it's no longer aligning to the surface. It's just placing it not aligned to the normals. And I don't want to have this effect, so I'm just going to go ahead and disable it. And again, this is also very good for landscapes when you want to have trees that are not going to be kind of leaning on a specific slope, because trees usually grow straight upright. They're not angled with the normals or with the landscape itself. So this is a good option to uncheck if you're painting trees, but in that case, we want to have this on. And we can also enable or disable random yaw. So this is going to randomly rotate, but if I have this disabled and paint, this will align all the chairs one way. And this is pretty good effect if this is what you want. This is good, you know, for placing something that's facing one single direction. Then you have your height. This will control the height in world units in the world where you can paint on. So for us, it does not matter at the moment because we're not painting on a landscape. Usually when you have a landscape above certain distances, you may not want to paint specific type of foliage. Like, so let's say grass cannot grow above maybe specific units in height. So you can occlude this, or you can limit where the static meshes get painted on in terms of the height in the world. And if I go to side view, so everything in the world, you have this line right here. This is your 0 units in height. Anything below is going to receive a negative value. Anything above is positive value. So let's say if you didn't want to paint anything above certain height, let's say anything above, let's say 800, you can define that value right in this property and just kind of limit the height where it gets painted. Let me jump back to perspective. So if I set this to, let's say 800, I'll be able to paint anything on the floor, but then at certain height right here, I won't be able to paint anything higher because we limited that maximum height. And let me go ahead and increase this or put it back to default. Again, this usually applies for landscapes. And then you have a few other properties for the instance settings. If you want to have the mobility for these static meshes to be static or dynamic objects, you can occlude them beyond a certain distance, meaning have them disappear the further you get away. You can define that here. You can enable or disable cast shadows on these objects if you need to. And this will apply to all the placed static meshes. So for a lot of these, you have to change these first, then paint them. Because if I change them now, it won't get propagated to the already placed static meshes. So you have to set these settings and then paint in order to see them. But when you get down to these settings, you will see the effect on all the placed static meshes. And one more option that's going to be useful for props is if I spawn in this world, I'll be able to walk through all the chairs. And I want to have collisions on these. So for all the placed meshes, you can actually enable collisions because they're disabled by default. They're set to no collisions. So let me go back to the foliage mode. And for all these 49 static meshes that are already placed, when you scroll down, you have right here collision preset. So you do not have to repaint them, you just have to enable them and choose block all. So now if I spawn, then I'll get stopped. So now they all have collisions. And one more option I want to show you, and then we'll add another static mesh, is right at the very top, you can add single. So this is a great option. Let me go ahead and select everything and let's delete it. So single will allow you to place a single static mesh. So if you need that precision, you go ahead, select single, and then when you left click, it's going to place that static mesh. Great for precision work. And you do have an option for single instance mode right here. To all selected. So if we had more static meshes, which we're going to add in a minute, so it'll place all of them together at the same time, or you can just cycle through. So if you had like multiple here, every time you left click, it will just go down the line and place one object after another, kind of cycling through all of them. And also you can duplicate all these meshes and that'll be kind of added in here. So right now I'm just kind of placing one by one, but let's say after a certain amount, I don't want to keep left clicking to kind of place these chairs like almost in the movie theater. I can actually select all of these and duplicate them. So if I select all, then let's go to select. So now we have everything selected. And then I've switched over to select mode. So again, I can just select each individual one and then hold Alt and duplicate it. Or I can do this for all of them. Let's go ahead and select them all again. And now with that selection made, we have our cursor, our gizmo for move, rotate, and scale. And I can hold down Alt and duplicate them all together. And you can see they're being added into this. So this is a great way you can just place a few using the single mode and then duplicate them a lot faster if you need that kind of precise positioning. So let's go ahead and select them all again, and I'm just going to remove them. And now let's add a second object that we could paint with. So I'm going to come down and just select a new static mesh. Let's do this cup. And I'm just going to drag it. Now we have two. And you can see they're both now enabled. And if I paint, by switching over to paint tool, when I begin to paint, it'll start to paint both of them. Now, of course, I can go ahead and even insert a third one. Now I can paint all three. And you can see now I'm painting three static meshes at the same time. If I want to go ahead and disable one of them, let's say I just want to paint the cup and the chair, but not the file cabinet, just disable this right here, and the other two are enabled. And now I am placing the cup and the chair together. Now for the cup, for example, we have the same properties as we did for the chair, so you can go ahead and tweak individual placement. You have your density, you have your radius, you have your scale, and so on. And then this way you can adjust specific properties for how that mesh will be painted. You have one for the chair, one for the cup, one for the file cabinet, and so on, as many as you need to add. Now let me go back to the single, and I want to show you the single instance. This is where you place single one, and right now we have all selected. So when you left click, you can see that I'm placing the chair and the cup together. And if I want to have all three, I just need to enable this file cabinet, and they're all kind of placed on top of each other. Now what I can do also, I can switch this to cycle through selected, and this is a neat mode because now you can place each individual one going down the line. So I left click, it'll place a chair, left click, it'll place a cup, left click, it'll place a file cabinet. And this one is getting rotated because for this one we have rotation for random yaw enabled, and I'll just go down the line. Great mode for, again, more precision. And one last thing about foliage mode, you can save this chair type that's being placed inside your level as individual asset, or you can just save your map and everything will be saved into your map It'll be just, when next time you open it up, you'll still have all these chairs and everything still will be inside your map. So you do not have to come over here and save as an asset type, but you can. So for example, let's just save the chairs. So I can just go ahead and left click on this save foliage asset, and it will ask you, where do you want to save this in? And let's go ahead and save it in props for now. So I'll just save it for whatever the default name is. Save. And if I come down here, here's our static mesh foliage type. And if I double click on this, it'll open up properties for this foliage type actor. And here I can actually swap to a different static mesh. And a lot of these options, the options that are available right here. But now it gets saved as an individual actor that can be saved inside your content browser. But like I said, again, you do not need to save this unless you want to have all these properties available without having to go to the foliage mode. So you can just open this up, tweak a few properties, kind of maybe swap things out, and then certain properties will be propagated into this chair right here. So for example, if I wanted to swap this for something else, I can do this right in here, and you can see it's updating. And let's actually place the chair back and then save it. I usually don't save it as an actual actor type because everything gets saved into the map, and if I need to tweak, I just go back to the foliage mode and I do my updates here. So it's just a little extra for you to consider if you wanted to have that as an individual actor inside your content browser with all the options in it. So with that, that is how you use the foliage mode to place props into your level. Now, if you want to learn UE5 completely from scratch as a beginner, I have an in-depth tutorial course that covers how to get started with UE5 to create environments. And if you want to get the static meshes that you saw in this tutorial and learn how to create and light beautiful interior environments using these assets, take a look at UE5 Retro Office Project. It's an extensive tutorial course that comes with 79 static meshes for you to use to create the environments with following the tutorials. Both courses are available right now for you to download, watch, learn, and create.